Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, animals, everybody. I can feel it getting warmer. I do like this. You know, I feel sorry for myself around this time of year because it's the birthday and everything. But then I suddenly realized that maybe it is a bit of a blessing in disguise because being born in sort of the end of winter, beginning of spring it's like probably the best time you could choose, really. So when I feel bad about August, I just think about the fact, well, you know, technically I'm kind of right at the edge of August, so maybe September's really my month. But your head will play tricks on you. You'll end up believing anything that you put out there as propaganda.
Well, let me tell you something that'll freak you out if you're already feeling sorry about growing a year older.
Yeah.
I saw a meme the other day that says 2050
Oh, yeah, it's closer. I know what you're going to say now.
is closer today. You're closer to 2050 than you are to 1990.
Wow, that's horrible. And you know, at 2026, which is, it sounds like a long time away, but by 2026, you're closer to 2050 than you were to 2000. I know. Listen, we don't last forever, and in some ways, it's a good thing. Like this insanity can end at some point, but it's amazing to just watch the march of time. You know, I thought about it this morning, waking up, and I'm like, wow, another burning platform. It feels like just yesterday we were doing the previous weeks, and here we are, like, this quick. Anyway, Mbulelo is going to join us in a minute, but what has happened to him is something that happened to me the other day. Your laptop just decides on its own that it's going to download some update. And you switch it on, and this has happened to me in meetings before, or where I really needed it, and then the thing, you know, it's got the update thing going on, and it says, well, you know, this should be done in 5 minutes or whatever, but laptops lie. And then you end up waiting and waiting and waiting.
Well, I have a friend who's one of his favorite things to say about technology is that technology is not like witchcraft. It just works.
But it always these updates, you're like, come on, must you do this now, Steve Jobs? Must this happen now while I'm getting ready for a presentation?
Listen here, it's just working. It's doing its job, going about its job.
Wouldn't it be funny if human beings updated like that? If humans just suddenly, they went like a bit blank on their face, and they just, oh, I think he's doing an update. They're like, you just watch someone freeze and they don't know what to do.
That would be awesome, because it would mean that at the end of that, some of those glitches that really irritate you about that person might have been bug fixes.
Right.
You know, those bugs would have been fixed.
Well, Michael says something interesting here. I don't know that this is true, because he says you never download updates on laptops. It's never necessary. That's not true. I mean, some of the operating system stuff, you know, like when Apple do an update to their whole operating system, it absolutely is necessary.
I love that. I love Michael. I love Michael's kind of just putting it out there matter of factly.
Yeah, like, and he's just saying it's never necessary. Sorry. And I'll be like, okay. And you know who I love even more is the people who just believe someone like Michael when they say something like that. Okay, I'll never download an update again. Sure.
That's why it happens automatically. Doesn't need your permission.
No. Eddie Murphy's Delirious is 38 years old today. Yo. That's unbelievable. Feels like it's yesterday we were watching that. Hey, Mbulelo's laptop's finished updating. How's it?
I'm back. Yeah.
Except Bulelo's a little bit out of focus. Your laptop has made you a little soft.
No, yeah, that's growing up in the northern suburbs.
It's not an update. It's a down date. That's what Imagine if you decide that your laptop didn't want to upload things, but it wanted to go backwards. You know, you're a conservative, one of those old school conservatives. I watched the most depressing little YouTube video. It's probably only about 15 minutes long. And I might just post the link for everybody to go and check it out. But
just to share the depression.
Well, it was about South Africans who've moved to New Zealand. And someone sent it to me because they couldn't believe how depressing it was. Now, look, again, I'm going to say, if you've moved somewhere and you're happy with that move, awesome. I'm with you 100%. This was easily the most dreary, miserable thing ever. There's this woman who she used to be in like middle management here in South Africa, and she moved to New Zealand. Now she's a bus driver. There's a guy, and he used to be an author for Die Vrye Weekblad, and he used to be a journalist. And he was quite successful over here, and now he's fixing shoes. But like,
why did they move?
Well, this is it, right? And then there's this one guy who, he talks about how New Zealand is so different to South Africa, and it's actually produced for New Zealand television. So I'm not sure what the gist was. I mean, there are neighborhoods.
The intention.
Yeah, there are a whole lot of neighborhoods there which are almost completely South African, and it turns out the South Africans kind of stick together in New Zealand, which is, I know you pull that face, but you're exactly right. Like that's the feel I had coming away from it. Again, I want to be clear about this because people tend to hear one thing and then they assume a whole lot of other things. I don't have any problem with anybody moving anywhere. You can go anywhere you like. I've got friends who are, in fact, most of the people I went to university with are living in other countries. Okay? And a lot of them,
really?
I'd probably 70% of them are very happy. I've got one friend who runs an ad agency in London, and he's extremely happy and successful with his wife. Another friend of mine is a lawyer in Vancouver. He's very happy with his wife. Another friend of mine just became an American citizen in Dallas, Texas, and he and his wife are extremely happy. And those three are examples to me of successful migrations. And you should be able to go anywhere in the world that you want to go. If you want to move to Beijing, go to Beijing. I also know lots of people who've moved to other places and they're very unhappy. But I would say in my friendship group, the close friends I have that have moved, the majority of them are very happy. Watching this documentary, though, I just thought, devil take the wheel, because there's no way. There's no way. Maybe it's just a New Zealand thing, and maybe because New Zealand is so antithetical to everything I care about. Maybe for some people, New Zealand's great. And again, I've got one friend who lives there, and he seems happy. He seems like he's having a good time. He and his wife, and
I also know somebody who's
3
happy.
kids. Yeah, sure. I'm sure that it's great, but
I'm sure he doesn't live in a neighborhood full of other South Africans.
No, I mean, what's the point of moving out into the world if you're going to keep the same friends and you're going to still wear a safari pak and you're going to, look for other South Africans to engage with the whole time? And
do you think they have shops there? Do you think they have like a corner shop that sells jungle oats and Milo and Oras?
This is what two of the people who they interview do, is they own and run the South African. No, really, they run the South African shop. And the place is full of like leopard print and Mrs. Ball's chutney, and I get it. All right, I get it. You're hankering for home, but apparently, here's the serious part: the divorce rate for families from South Africa who immigrated to New Zealand, not for all other countries, but to New Zealand. That's why I mentioned all the marriages in all that group of friends of mine earlier. The divorce rate in New Zealand for South Africans who've immigrated there is 70%, 70. So it obviously puts a huge strain on the relationship. And hey, listen.
Well, but there are many factors that make that strain. I mean, I'm looking at Aurelia here saying her uncle was a lecturer at UJ. 9 months to find it. So what I ask myself is, when you decide to move to another country, surely you do some research and you plan ahead, and you don't just move there without like a plan, or not? Clearly not, because here you are 9 months later, and I'm just like,
his wife was a physiotherapist here and became a glorified masseuse there. And she says, oh yeah, and the wife and him barely speak.
Yeah, That's a tricky one. Hey, on the moving thing, nobody sticks together like the Germans. So wherever they go globally, they're very, very unique. I mean, even in South Africa here, you go to like Hermanus, you literally might as well be in Stuttgart, because
and they have
what they do is
Deutsche
they
Schule.
open their own shops. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Well, they've got a whole community that's. Pumi, you were in that community in South Africa to some degree. You went to Deutsche Schule.
Yeah, but I mean, I had people in our classes. They were all over the place. Maybe Joburg is different.
Right.
Joburg is different because Joburg is like that, right? It's got a small Portuguese community over there. It's got all of those kinds of things. But
No, but
it's also
I meant
full of-
globally. Like so when I lived in London, the Germans they don't like come and integrate. They do their thing. We live here. We buy our bread here. We do our thing wherever we go.
That sort of
And I think
sounds
it's
like
natural.
this documentary. Well, it is natural, like birds of a feather. That's fine. But I think if you're going to leave your country of origin and go somewhere else, it's almost incumbent on you to make a bit of an effort to assimilate. Like if I had to move somewhere, you can't keep supporting the blowbiller if you go to, Seattle, Washington. Like you have to at some point start supporting the country that's now supporting you. You know what I mean? Here's the other
Bulls.
Well,
the Bulls are the biggest franchise, isn't it, Bulelo? They're everywhere.
They're the most successful. Huh? Yeah.
I just want to
got the most money as well.
As a final thought, because watching this documentary was just, I felt so hollow afterwards. The worst part of it is apparently New Zealanders consider South Africans arrogant. Now, just take a minute. How often on this show have we spoken about that Calvinist influence in South Africa? And among white Afrikaners and among black people, there's this feeling that humility is something really virtuous all on its own, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why so many South Africans call Nigerians and Americans arrogant, because we have a bit of an inferiority complex. You know what I'm talking about. Now imagine how big the inferiority complex, or how boring the people of a country that call us arrogant. To me, that's just mind-boggling. Imagine New Zealanders walking around going, oh no, here comes that arrogant South African. And meanwhile, it's like Stoffel, who used to live in,
But maybe that's also indicative of what happens when you come into it, because some of that arrogance is a response factor. It's like a protective mechanism, right? Yeah. So now you've lost your status in society. So one of the things that you then kind of compensate with is probably a level of kind of aloofness. Now I have to see it. Now I have to see the video.
All right, I'll tell you what. I'll have them post the link at the end of the show, because if you watch it now, you're not going to listen to us. There's no point in watching it now. But I'll send you the link. It's unbelievable.
but with this generation, like where we are as South Africa, we have to be brutal enough to say why most people moved. Right now, it is mostly white people, and we know they moved more for the gevaar than actually, I want to go to New Zealand, I want to go to Australia. It was just, oh no, the melanin people are here. Largely, not all. No,
you are right.
So the mindset already is moving. The melanin people are here, and not all, but so when you're moving, not because of the real reasons on the ground, but rather anywhere but here, that's always a bad decision. It's like, oh, why are you breaking up with your wife? The other one's better looking, not the other one's more solid, reliable, trustworthy. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So if any motivation to do something that is based on negatives is usually a bad decision. But I will say this is like they quickly went round the room in this group of South African women who were like, they get together in some kind of club and sing songs or whatever, and they went around the group and in this crowd. Listen, it's pretty sad, because every single one of them had moved because of crime, because they'd had someone murdered in their family or whatever. So that's an understandable impulse. I get that completely. Like when, if someone broke into your house and tried to kill you, you wouldn't want to live in that house anymore. That is often, the motivation. So that notwithstanding, because I'm not going to mock those people, I think they've had they've had to make some very grueling and tough decisions, and I totally understand that. But there are a huge proportion of people who leave a place for negative reasons. And in this case, in South Africa, there was absolutely, without a doubt, some of it was like, let's get away from the blacks. And some of it was blatant, like, oh, we've lost our country, it's time to get out, kind of thing. It's this almost the surrender mentality, which again, if that's the reason that you do something, that's up to you. That's your business. I'm not going to criticize you, but that would never be a reason for me to do something. If you're not moving for positive reasons, you're going to have a very tough time. That's all I can say. And they actually admit this, because the one guy said he bumped into 3 South Africans who were complaining about the Maoris, and he said to them, guys, and he said, guys, you're taking your poison from South Africa and you're putting it in here. I thought, that's not going to go well for those chaps. It's just not going to be a fun time.
There's so many things happening in that statement. Like, I'm going to leave where I come from, and then I'm going to get you, and then I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with what you're doing over here.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
So can I tell you an equally, I have to use a word that South Africans don't like in the story. I was on a train in Italy, and these 2 guys are speaking Afrikaans. So obviously they don't know I can understand. I could be Maria Balotelli's cousin, So is the guy, so I can see the guys looking at me. Obviously I'm the only black guy on the train, and now I can hear where the conversation's going. So the guy says, "Wat soek hierdie kaffers hier?" Right?
Oh my
but
God.
I don't say anything, because I'm not like I've told you before, racism for me, I've been taught not to respond to it.
But did you even react? Like, could they see? Oh, okay. So they don't know anything. They're going to carry on. You want to hear where this goes?
Yeah, because I could hear already the tone the whole time. And I thought, this must be such a sad life. Like, you're in Italy now. Look how you live. And you still, it's like South Africa's on your mind. You know what I mean? Like, if you get divorced, enjoy the new wife, chief. Like, I didn't even understand. And even at a young age, and I have a really, really bad temper. If I lose it, I lose it, right? It's like, even then I felt sad for them. Instead of getting angry, I was like, that is so sad. I'm so sad for you.
Yeah.
Like,
did you say that to them in Afrikaans? Like,
no. Well, if there's one thing I don't
they needed,
is racism. Like,
but who cares what they need? It's not your job to help other people along the way. And I feel like Buleto's hit on something really important here. There's so many people who have backward ideas in this world, and actually, I'm not going to correct them. It's not my business. You go ahead and be stupid. It's like, for example, you go ahead and you argue with your wife every day instead of trying to make a happy marriage. You argue with your friends every day and end up with nothing. If you want to make bad decisions, you play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. That's kind of how I feel about it. And like, your reaction must have been hard to contain, because you don't hear a lot of that blatant stuff much anymore. People are much more they're much more indirect about their prejudices and general bigotry these days, because it has become a lot more, and thank God, socially unacceptable for people to voice downright outrageous bigotry. And you don't hear a lot of it. In the old days, I remember there were people who would use that word around me all the time. As a kid, for example, I would hear that word and I'd think, this is just how people talk. Honestly, you don't hear it anymore. I haven't heard it for a long time. And
it's interesting you say that. It happened to me. I mean, this is not the diaries of MKT, but I was walking in Cape Town. Yeah, I was walking. So I was living in Cape Town, obviously 3 years ago, before I joined Cliff Central. And I was walking. My mentor, and this isn't like in a shoddy part of town. My mentor lives in Bishop's Court, that's where you want to live. And Jesus. I was walking there. That's where you want to live. And see these 2 kids roll down the window, say same word, what are you doing here? Scream it out the window and drive off.
3 years ago.
No, I wouldn't say kids, but like old enough to be driving a yuppie SUV in the burbs. Like, hey you, hey, what are you doing here? So I mean, like you say, it's rare, but it's out there. But what I really wanted to say about now is, I think what's awesome now you're starting to see probably more with people leaving for an enlightened self-interest across the color spectrum. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm a CA. I want to go and work in Singapore. I want to go and work in, in Luxembourg. I want to go work in London. They're moving for those reasons now, rather than I want to get away from religion or race. And that's awesome.
Absolutely.
We should celebrate that we're
Sure.
producing people in South Africa that the global market is willing to absorb. And that's an awesome thing.
That's a good thing. And you know what? People must always go to chase the best possible opportunities for them and their families. And here's Bruce saying, for example, he's read that there are more blacks than whites leaving South Africa. It would be good to have the facts. Well, that is actually true. In fact, it was Stats SA that published a survey about 2 or 3 years ago. So before all of our current maladies and the coronavirus and lockdowns, a lot of black professionals have left South Africa. I'm sure that among the three of us, we can name a couple of black immigrants from South Africa.
Indicative, so Bulelo, you're right that we should celebrate the fact that we do have world-class professionals and sports people and actors and all of those things. But what it also indicates is that we don't have opportunities for them here. We don't have equal opportunities for them here. And that's even sadder. That for me is really sad, to say that we lose all these brains to the rest of the world, which we could use here. We need them too, in order to, and it's, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We need them so that we can be competitive with the rest of the world. There's, what else is there? Well, it's like any company.
I don't want to turn this morning into like a New Zealand bashing, but I saw that Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, has shut down the entire country over one case of coronavirus. One case this week. And Australia is in complete lockdown. I want to play you a clip. This is unbelievable. So I'm just going to play you the sound. I don't know if Pumi and Bulelo are going to be able to hear this, but it's worth you listening to if you're listening to us on the podcast and you're watching us live on YouTube. I hope this works. But here is the what's his name? The Premier of New South Wales in Australia, and this is what he has to say. All right, this is his message to the people of New South Wales.
There will be no removal of masks to consume alcohol outdoors. So you will no longer be able to remove your mask to drink a cocktail at a pop-up beer garden on a footpath as part of a pub crawl.
And he says it with such an arrogant, he's like, there will be no removal of masks to drink a cocktail in a park on a footpath. There will be none of that. Like a parent, like shitting on their child. I mentioned this yesterday. You listen to it, it's just so condescending. It's unbelievable. And the people of the great nation of Australia are just rolling over and letting people like that, this little nerd with glasses on, this turd, this hot poo of a human being, they're letting him talk to them like that. It's outrageous. Like, we wouldn't tolerate that here. Maybe we are arrogant. Maybe we're just confident. If Cyril says that to us from March last year, did any of us go, "Oh yes, sir, 3 bags full, Cyril, we'll do exactly what you told us"? In fact, I don't think the three of us and everybody who listens to us, I don't think any of us have followed any of those rules.
The immediate response of South Africans was, I already know a guy that I'm going to get straight. I can get a case for you. It's double the price, but don't worry about it. But I'll hook you up at the corner immediately. But it's because,
South
in those...
we just...
Yeah,
don't like
because they're so supine. Like people in that part of the world. Yes, there's no potholes. Yes, they stop at the traffic light before they walk. But they are so supine. The Canadians,
supine, good word.
Oh,
so just a minor correction from Duds. He says that's Dictator Dan from Victoria.
Oh my!
So Dictator Dan, who is. I mean, really, like this guy, how the hell he thinks he's going to ever get... Mind you, he may be re-elected. Because a lot of people really prefer having safety, in inverted commas, because it's not really safety, but safety over everything else. They prefer that to being self-reliant. And they would rather have, be told what to do, basically. And feel this illusion of security.
So this guy I work with has been reading Dr. Viktor
Oh yeah,
Frankl's
awesome.
kind of experiences coming out of the camp and, the psychology of it all. And one of the things that I find very fascinating is he talks about the psychology of a group and that most people want to be in the center. You don't want to be in the front because you get the whippings, the lashings, and you don't want to be at the back because you also get whipped and lashed. So if you can just be safe in the middle there, kind of going with the flow, and then still have the buffer of people around you kind of taking most of the hit. That's what it's about. That's what the safety is about. It's kind of like, just keep me here in this warm and fuzzy place. Don't. And so that's why most people kind of are relatively compliant, of the flow. What are most people doing? Okay, I'm going to do that too.
Afraid so. Here's Dictator Dan, if you're wondering what he looks like and you didn't get to hear the clip. There he is. This is the guy who's telling people in Victoria State, that's where Melbourne is, what to do. And they're all listening to him. Unbelievable. So, all right. I know it sounds like we're having a go at the Antipodes today, but I promise that's not the purpose of this morning's conversation. We've got a lot of other good things to talk about. And one of those things is Afghanistan, which I know we've been discussing. Here's a cute little video of George W. Bush suddenly realizing that Obama and Trump are getting the blame for what's going on in Afghanistan, even though he started it. So take a look at this. Trump, and he's just nodding his head, going, yeah. That's George W. We haven't heard from him in a long time. I wonder if he said anything now, whether it would go down particularly well. Biden addressed the people the other day, and it didn't go down well on the left, the right, or the center. People are not impressed with what's happening there. We'll speak to Brooke Spector, by the way, a little later on about that, among other things. Yes, Poms?
Well, just because I knew we were going to talk about Afghanistan, just kind of refreshing my memory and preparing for today's show, I came across that wonderful little video of George W. with the bullhorn at Ground Zero.
Okay.
The world will hear from us soon. Just like 20 years later.
Yeah, that was quite powerful. Remember, he'd just become president. I mean, he'd been president for a year when all of that happened. And that was one moment in that presidency that I remember thinking, actually, there may just be a bit of leadership in this guy. He might not just be his daddy's son, who's, and I thought it is moments like that when the whole nation is so focused that you do see leadership, not this watery rubbish we've seen from our president, where, we've got riots and looting, and like a few days later, he comes out of the dark and says, well, we're going to try and take control, blah, blah, blah. Be strong, stand for something. Anyway, we'll get to that later on in the Burning Platform. I don't want to take up all the time now. A couple of headlines that you need to know about this morning. You want to hear?
I love the first one. Love the first one.
All right, so let's do the first one. Carl Niehaus. Pumi's onto my headlines here faster than I am. Carl Niehaus has said, I will continue protesting for the release of Jacob Zuma. There's a nice picture of him with his legal team and those he referred to as his comrades outside the Escort Magistrates Court. So he is going to continue protesting. He was arrested last month, of course, after participating in an illegal demonstration outside the Escort Correctional Services facility where Zuma is serving 15 months. The staunch Zuma supporter appeared in the Escort Magistrates Court on Wednesday for allegedly breaching COVID-19 regulations, but the matter was postponed to November. Niehaus was taken into police custody after allegedly convening a group of people despite the regulations. So this guy is just unbelievable, right? He says it's all trumped up. He says that this is absolute nonsense. There are people who were not arrested. Jacob Zuma is being used as a scapegoat, blah, blah, blah. What do you think of this, Pums? I mean, you've been watching this story too.
Dude, no, I want to tell you when I think of this, but I just remembered that like the last time I was on the show, I wanted to tell you about bumping into Carl Niehaus in Rosebank.
What happened?
And it was a shame, man. You know, there's that they love using that photo of him in his like military gear, surrounded by barbed wire. I think he was in Bloemfontein, like outside the Bloemfontein coach. You know the picture I'm talking about,
Yes.
right? Where he's
Yeah.
like standing there with his backpack and he's looking down and he's just all alone. And it's so sad to see Carl Niehaus kind of clinging on to his ideals. Oh man, I saw him in Rosebank, and I felt I actually saw that picture in real life because he's all by himself with his hands in his pockets, just like walking, looking down. I felt so sad for him because I think we all laugh at him now, right? When we see him on the news, when we hear him, I am Umsholozi. Umsholozi is us. And but when you see him, so sad, guys. So sad.
I think I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it to you too. There is no one blacker in South Africa than a white guy that only dates black chicks and hangs out with black people. And everyone knows who I'm talking about. When a white guy's into the black lifestyle, there's no one more black on this planet. So Carl Niehaus is that guy. I bet you he only listens to 90s hip hop. And yeah, he even speaks better Zulu
I think he
than the
only
Zulus on this
listens to 90s Kwaito. I think he listens to Kwaito. You know, I think
and Maskandi music. He's like he's that kind. You know, he's probably. I interviewed him on my TV show this year, and it was one of the saddest things when he walked in and when he walked out. He really has nobody. He has nobody. His daughter, he was telling me, she gets bullied at school because of who her dad is.
Dude, he lied about his mother being dead so that he could collect money. I'm just like everything about this guy.
I don't have sympathy, but he is a sad person. And I got the distinct impression at the end of that interview that was the only thing he had to do that day.
Wow.
That's a bit sad.
Sure.
You know.
That's why he has to, and this is what I love about this country, right? Like Carl Niehaus can protest. He gets listened to. People like shove mics in his face. It's just, you know.
Well, because we're all in on the joke. We put microphones and cameras in front of Carl Niehaus because we're kind of taking pleasure in his pain. Really, it's a bit of Schadenfreude, I think.
Oh, but seeing him walking down the path, I think it was like near Starbucks or something. I was just like, shame.
And he's going to go drink rubbish coffee. His whole life sucks. He's going to go drink rubbish coffee at Starbucks and he's alone. Oh, terrible.
Did you say no?
No.
No.
It's like when you're the conductor, you don't look at the trombone session because it encourages them. If I said hi, he would have wanted to say stuff. No, you must you look down and quickly walk past. What? You don't encourage rubbish. Hey.
We're going to have to talk about this later on in the Burning Platform as well. And I mentioned Brooks Spector. We'll have Brooks and we'll have Ivo Vegter both on with Pumi and I later on to discuss a whole bunch of things, mostly Afghanistan, what's going on in U.S. politics. Brooks is a great guy to talk to on that front. But we'll also talk about this story from Fin24. I don't know if you saw it yesterday. And I'm just going to refer to it now and we'll get into it later on. But the government here in South Africa has a plan. They want South Africans to pay 12% of their earnings into a state-managed fund. This is over and above all of our taxes. Doesn't that sound like a great plan? I mean, really, if you think that the government that has mismanaged every cent that you've given them so far needs just to have more of your money, then obviously you'll be in favor of this. That's about, 3 or 4 people in the whole country. But let's see how it goes. Those 3 or 4 people coincidentally happen to be in the government. But, Pumi's just going, great plan, bro. You know, that's going to work very well.
As a South African, no problem. I'm open to it. But I have a few conditions. Conditions, right?
Yeah.
The one of them is, tell you what, if you can give me electricity for the next 10 years, right, in a row, So you don't get a day off. Just give me electricity 10 years in a row, uninterrupted, so that I can do whatever I like. You can have 12% of my money, but 10 years in a row, that's on you, pal. Maybe let's just start with that. That's it. That's all I ask. Is that unreasonable?
We've already given them 40% of our money, or a fraction of that to do it, and they couldn't do it with 40%. What makes you think an extra 12 is going to make all the difference?
Well, I'm trying to live in the spirit of openness, believe in the new. All I'm asking for is 10 years of electricity, and then we can talk about the 12% thing. So,
yes, guys, math, just arithmetic is an important skill to have.
Yeah.
Because this 12%, is it 12% over and above the almost 40% we pay in taxes? I'm just arithmetic. I'm not looking for lots of, So is it 40 plus 12, or is it 12 of the 40? Right?
No,
no.
That 40 is gone. Been stolen already. Sorry. This is an additional 12.
And I'm just like, I don't know, 40 plus 12. Guys, it's a big chunk of, it's a big chunk of joker.
What the problem is now? We can go to Sweden where they pay 60%, and I can see the lack of potholes. So now, so I'm paying those taxes. That's almost like you pay the money, and you get to date me instead of Idris Elba. You get this package instead of the Idris Elba package for the same price. Nah, that ain't gonna fly, Chief. That ain't gonna work. That ain't gonna work.
It's a shitty deal. It's like when you buy those Chinese products. You're getting a cheap deal, but then the thing breaks after a week's use. And meanwhile, someone else paid the same amount of money and they got a good product. Anyway, listen, we got to move on to some other headlines. There's this horrible story. I don't know if you saw this. I say it's a horrible story because I didn't even know about it until now. But the Gauteng Department of Education says they've identified 6 culprits who committed the arson attack on a school hall in Glen Vista on Monday. Now, we've often joked about how rough the South is. And in fact, this is Leanne's old school, I think. The school hall in Glen Vista was torched by some pupils who expressed they were not willing to sit for an examination. I mean,
do you know what the best part of that is? Do you know what the best part of that whole story is? What? So Monday, they torched the school hall. And on Tuesday, they just set up desks outside in the field, and they had to write their exam in the sun.
Wow.
I don't know if there's any good story here, because
I think that's a good comeuppance, right? Because now, the school hall's gone. Okay, you're writing your exam in the sun. Versus the school hall's gone. We're going to postpone the exam and see where else we can put you.
Yeah, just do it in the sun. Is that what they did? Because
that's what they did.
All right, I've only got the story here about
there were videos on social media. There were videos on social media of the flames in the school hall.
I see.
And
the curtains on the stage. Those
yes.
That's what they set alight. So I don't know if the rest of the building kind of also eventually, but there were videos on social media of those curtains and somebody with a fire.
Oh my God, that's insane.
What they should have done was, they actually should have followed instructions. Our former president has told us how you put out a fire. Is you actually need a fire pool outside, and what you can do is we were told that you line up with buckets to put out a fire. That's why you'd have a fire pool. So that school should maybe have had a fire pool outside of the hall. I don't know if you remember that. I'm sure Lossie's premiers.
Good advice.
No, they actually had a fire extinguisher. Thank goodness.
Oh,
here's the school sitting outside writing the exam.
Wow.
Do you know how bright a piece of paper is in the sun?
They're going to do worse than they even thought.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
awesome, right? That is awesome. It's like
you need leadership in that time. You need leadership. Is that this is not tolerated.
Here's the problem. There are probably some of those kids who are sitting outside like that who didn't do anything wrong, right? And they're also being punished. It's just not right. That's not fair.
Except you've been in high school, Gareth, and you know how things are in high school.
Everyone gets
Like that plan was hatched, and enough people knew they could have told somebody, and they could have like prevented it, and they were just like, let's see if this goes off, and then maybe we won't have to write anyway. Haha.
And also, it's important in teams, right? Because in every good sports team I've ever been in, is that the locker room must control itself. So now, what it's got to do, it sets a tone in amongst. It's why the military, the proper military, is they remove your identity. Is that actually we must learn that you don't matter. The needs of the many in a school outweigh those 3 or 4. If you didn't know, why didn't you know, and why aren't you taking control? Because that's how success comes, right? Is you've got to get everyone on the same page. So this is leadership from whoever the headmaster or the head mistress is. I love it. I'm on board. This will not be tolerated.
I also thought this is like fantastic.
I love it.
Fantastic.
All right.
Just right in the sun.
And, imagine this happened in Australia. Oh my God, like they're making the children sit outside with no sunscreen and no government regulated. Oh, but South Africans, get outside, man. Plus, you must also mow that lawn.
Look, what I love about it is also something else that we kind of don't see so much anymore. Is the parents kind of went, they must sit for the exam. They must sit there in the sun for the exam. There are no parents out there like protesting, my child's not going to be sitting in the sun. Yeah. You must make a plan for them to write somewhere else. You don't have none of that. Everybody was just like, they're going to sit in the sun.
Right. In the army, Good Cop says, if one person made a mistake, everybody got an oppie. So that everyone got into the same trouble. Yeah, I like that.
That's an oppie.
This story shows how the example is the teacher of all children. That's exactly right from Michael. Yeah, spot on. All right. So one or two quick things I want to tell you about. We've got the Burning Platform coming up a little bit later on, which is always good. And this morning it should be fiery one. We've got Brooks Spector. We've got Ivo Vegter. And we'll talk about some of the international and local stories that everyone's talking about at the moment, and hopefully give you some insight and analysis with our guests. But I also want to tell you about something that I did the other day. I went to visit one of our clients, Tom's Art. I've told you about them before. Do you know what gilding is, Pumi and Bolelo? You know what gilding is?
Like gilding a lily?
Correct. Yeah. It's where you take gold leaf or silver leaf. It's an actual thin layer of the stuff. I mean, it's really an unbelievable thin and you pop it on furniture, and then you brush it in gently with something called a fixer, and you gild all those chairs that you see in, I don't know, Windsor Castle or Buckingham Versailles, exactly. On the doors, they gild the kind of detailed work on the doors, the moldings,
and incredible. The frames of all the portraits.
Absolutely, that's exactly what gilding is. So they take thin gold or silver leaves by hand and they apply them to the furniture, and it transforms it obviously into something completely different. It takes boring old wood and makes it look incredible. And it works, it stays, because it's actual metal, it stays looking good for a very long time. It's incredible how they do this. And you're going to find some of that at Tom's Art. I popped in there the other day, and they really do have an incredible range of pretty amazing stuff. You need to go and see it. They've got classical art, furniture, accessories, and some really good deals. If you're in Joburg, you can make sure you go to their Cromwell showroom. They're at 15 Dartfield Road, and they're there from weekdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturday mornings from 9 to 1. That's Tom's Art. They're at 15 Dartfield, Dartfield Road in Cromwell. Make sure you let them know that Cliff Central sent you, and please report back. We want to know what you got, if you got anything from them. So that's 15 Dartfield Road. It's called Tom's Art, Tom's Art. Very, very easy. Go and check them out, and you can say that we sent you if you want to get a good deal. All right? Very nice.
Awesome.
All right. So, Pums, we missed you last week. What are we going to catch up on in your life? There must be some things going on. You've been really busy.
Dude, I'm just a mom. I'm just a simple mom living my life here in Joburg.
You're a businesswoman. You're a mom. You're
nothing out of the sorts. Nothing like. Did you see this? Because had hoped it would be one of your stories. Did you see the story? Australia again,
Oh,
right?
we're really
With the
going.
woman, a woman who was like shopping in the spice aisle, and there's
Yeah.
like a python, a 10-foot python came
That's like my worst fear. I don't know what I would do. I saw this one video of I don't know where it was. I think it was somewhere in Indonesia or Thailand or somewhere like that. And there were these huge monitor lizards crawling around on the shelves.
Imagine that.
I even played the video on the show the one morning. Now, I hate those things more than anything. If you want to talk about me, I become properly afraid. Like I get, you know how some people scream and shout and jump on furniture when they see a spider?
Yeah, Kanejo was one of those people.
Oh my God. So that's not my favorite thing. It's really the most terrible.
Turns out, though,
go to Bali.
The snake is not venomous, and they caught it and released it into the woodlands. But I'm just like, imagine, like, I'm just going to go for this can of beans over baked
and then there's a
snake.
Huge python comes out of there. No, thank you. That's not a great idea. I would be traumatized for a very long time. In fact, I'm rocking back and forth now, just trying to soothe myself back into listening. Jesus.
That's awesome.
Bulelo was listening to Sean Sanders yesterday talking about Bitcoin and all the rest, and you came to some realization that you love being alive at a time where you've got things like social media, Bitcoin. You know, you can hit the internet now, and this is something I've spoken about a number of times on the show. You can find out about anything. I mean, I was joking yesterday with Simpiwe because she laughed at me, and she didn't think very highly of me not being able to use the swipe up link on Instagram, and I figured that out, and I did it thanks to the internet. You know, I went on, and it gives you step-by-step instructions. My favorite thing is to watch these videos where people do crafts on, like you can either get it on Facebook or you go straight to YouTube or on Instagram. But these people who make these amazing epoxy tables, or they turn wood, or they fix broken stuff. They teach you how to solder or how to weld, or, you know, there's just incredibly talented people doing this stuff. And for me, the internet represents a huge resource for learning. Forget about the other stuff, social media and all that crap, because I think that has a good and a bad side. But there's never been as much information out there as there is now. Never. There's no excuse. There's no excuse anymore. If you are ignorant in 2021, you're ignorant willfully.
I totally agree. Especially if you have a personality type like I have. Like I'm more of an autodidact. Like I don't like to go and ask somebody what's going on, you know? Like I don't like the, okay, I'll get back to you thing. Don't worry about it. Let me, in fact, if I can eliminate the people, I want to get straight to the knowledge is what I really like, which is why university was a bit of a thing for me, besides the 15 beers a day, you know, where I failed the whole 2 years. But like, I don't really like the, oh man. Yeah.
Hold on. Bulelo.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Wonderful. Autodidactic in a sentence.
Yeah.
Just like that. I think that, that in itself requires a moment.
I like it.
I actually Googled that word before here, so I don't want people thinking I'm smart. I Googled it. It's my Google word of the day, and I nailed it.
Didactically.
What do you go onto the internet to find out about besides the word autodidact? What do you use? No, seriously. If let's give examples. I just mentioned how I like watching these videos of people who make things or people who explain things, and that was never available before. You had to look it up in a book, and usually you didn't have that book lying around at home, so you'd have to go to a library or you'd have to ask someone. We didn't have the internet, and now, you know, there's just really no excuse. If you want to know about anything, you can. We spoke about gilding just a second ago. You can see videos of people teach you how to do that.
It's like an elaborate like screensaver. You know how screensavers would like get you, and then you just zoned watching that thing kind of morph into lots of that's what all these videos are like. right? So you get caught up. You look at the first one and you're just like, how to like make up like smoky eyes, and then
Mhm.
it just gets weirder and weirder. You eventually are watching like video after video of like some Chinese person transforming themselves into a black girl with makeup.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
It's phenomenal.
It's amazing. I love the internet.
So for me, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I want to hear what you watch.
No, like I like to know how things work. Like I don't like when people tell me how things work. I really like to know, how is it possible for a giraffe to have a heart that functions? Like that kind of thing interests me. How is that happening while I'm alive and I also have a heart? But that's insane to power a machine like that. So I love that I can really, without people, without influence, without feeling, I can take my ego out of it. I kind of like that side of it, you know? I love that. It's like, I love to know how computers work. How does a TV work? How are TVs so thin now, yet the technology is getting better? That's not because the Korean people that are magnificent in design, Samsung, feel like they should. It's like there are people doing incredible things that are possible for human beings. Even if you're from Limpopo, you could do this if you just have that knowledge. I love that.
And the funny thing, like you mentioned, TVs is a great example of technology. Like TVs have not only become thinner, better, clearer, more definition, more enabled to like just directly stream from the internet or anything else. We've got all these amazing services that you can now get on TV as well. But it's actually also become cheaper. Like a TV now, a really high quality TV now is way, way cheaper than what they were. The same amount of technology or the same amount of clarity that you would have got 5 years ago. It's half the price. It's like the inverse. The technology curve goes this way and the price curve goes the opposite way. So that's really cool. But here are some things that other people are mentioning. So Derek says he likes watching videos of blacksmiths. There's a guy called Alex Steele. Now, those, that's a talent. That's a skill that if we didn't have it on YouTube would probably die out. There are not that many blacksmiths in the world. Dud says we have misinformation, disinformation exploding everywhere. I'm left with not believing very much these days. That's also true. Beth says if you want to convert pounds to kilograms, thank you, Google. How did we do that? How did we do that before? We used to have these discs that you would turn. You'd have the amount on the inside, and then it would give you the pound amount on the outside or whatever. It was a piece of hardware you had to use, or you'd have to know the formula in your head and actually sit down and write down how many pounds to a kilogram. And then we multiply.
If you have a really fancy scale, it's got both.
Correct. But I mean, who had those in those days?
You've just, Beth's just opened Pandora's box there. Dear Americans, if the point of measurement is to get accuracy, why the hell are we still using the imperial system? It doesn't make sense. The metric system goes right down to the zero. Let's move on. What are these clowns doing? But thanks for Google, by the way.
There's this terrific map of the world, and they show countries that use the metric system, and then they show the one country that uses the imperial system. It's amazing. Robert says he loves watching those how it's made videos.
Yeah.
That's also good. Good Stuff says, I like watching art restoration, Baumgartner on YouTube. He even did gilding in a frame the other day. See, that's the kind of stuff that it's there for you to see. I love watching carpets being cleaned, says Annette.
Wow, Annette.
It's quite therapeutic. You get the... Oh. I know what she's talking about.
That moment where it's just...
Jared says, I forgot how to have sex, so now I had to go onto the internet to remind myself of how that works. Hilton brings up, this is a channel I watch all the time. I'm subscribed to it, actually. It's a guy called Nile Red. Awesome. Not Nike Red. I think he meant Nile Red on YouTube. This guy does chemistry and incredible experiments. He's just easily the best chemical expert on YouTube, and he's very, very sharp. Does some amazing stuff too. Just even if you just want to watch what happens, it's really fun to watch. That's Nile Red, Nilered. So check that out. Very, very cool. Okay, we're out of time. We've got to get to the burning platform, which is coming up next. We will speak to our guests, none other than Brooks, Spector, Ivo Vegter, and Pumi Mashiko. And we'll get into all the local and international stories that are of importance and interest to you. So stick around for that and a whole lot more. It's all coming up. In the Burning Platform, brought to you every week by Nando's. It's your chance to hear honest and interesting and analysis, and I suppose also some opinion on all the things that are going on in the world. And there's nothing bigger in the world at the moment in terms of news than the situation in Afghanistan, which, I mean, this word I've used to describe Afghanistan before, I'm going to use it again. That place is an absolute clusterfuck. It was 20 years ago. It still is now. And we'll look at exactly what's happening. We'll find out from our guests what they think of President Joe Biden's withdrawal, what they think of the reaction to that, what they think is in store for Afghanistan, who's going to fill the void, who's going to come and take up that vacuum of power that exists there now, and what kind of creatures are the Taliban, and what are we dealing with this time round? There's so many things to be answered. We'll get into it because I've been waiting to talk about this stuff for a very long time. So all of that and more on the way. CliffCentral.com. Thank you for joining us this morning. We got lots of good stuff on the menu. Stick around.
This week on Auto Central.
Yeah, there's always a surprise. One thing that we can always count on is consumers being kind of robust and changing as things change in the markets. And it's no different this year. Two things that were spotlighted for me, which I found really interesting, was the fact that used cars are getting more expensive. And then another thing that I found really interesting is that the EV sentiment is changing. I didn't think it would be changing so quickly, but it appears that people are being a little bit more open to the idea of EV cars.
Catch Auto Central, SA's #1 motoring podcast, every Monday at 9 a.m.
Hi, my name is Martin Bosov. I'm the culture evangelist at King Price Insurance.
So what culture? How culture? We do a little bit of a resilience program with them. Just quick things, strengthening them as individuals.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you might have read it, heard it 1,000 times, etc.
Becoming a politician isn't the only way to get a little something on the side. Have a great economic quarter regardless of the state of the nation with a Nando's quarter chicken and any single side for just 49 Rand. Nando's. Fire it up.
Yes, indeed. It's Thursday, which means another chance for us all to get into the bones and the meat of the big stories of the week. This is also your chance to hear some really interesting opinions from people who are expert and who have been paying attention to the news at a time where you maybe are too busy trying to keep yourself afloat. You're worried about coronavirus. You're worried about all kinds of other things. And fortunately for you, we have the best in the business here with us today. Now, if you don't already know these gentlemen, then let me disabuse you of all your preconceived notions. The first of our guests this morning is none other than Brooks Spector. It's very good to see you again, Brooks. He is none other than a former U.S. diplomat in Africa and East Asia. He's written for the Daily Maverick from its inception, and I've read many of your pieces in the Daily Maverick, Brooks. You're also post-retirement a Bradlow Fellow of the South African Institute of International Affairs and a Writing Fellow of the University of Johannesburg's Institute for Advanced Studies. It's good to see you. How are you, my friend?
Good morning, Derek. It's Gareth. Sorry, I'm good. I'm sleepy, but I'm good.
Yeah, I'm sorry to wake you up so early, but then this week I don't think there are many U.S. Political analysts who've been sleeping. It's been a hell of a week, right?
Yeah, no, I had to go look at a map to find Afghanistan so I could figure out what was going on.
Well, maybe former president.
That's all I seem to be talking about this week and reading about and paying attention to.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we have to make you do it again, but there's lots of stuff we still have to unpack, and I'm sure that this issue is not going to go away in a hurry. I also want to introduce this morning someone who's well known to this show. He's been on a number of times. He's a freelance journalist, columnist, speaker, and independent researcher who loves debunking myths and misconceptions. He sometimes gets into trouble for these, but that's one of the reasons we love him. And he is our guest this morning, no stranger to the Burning Platform. You can find him on the Daily Friend. His recent columns include Should Vaccines Be Compulsory? An Insecure, Paranoid Government is Dangerous, and The Limits to Growth Affirmed Wrongly Again. He is Ivo Vegter. How are you, Ivo?
Good morning, Gareth. I'm very good, in yourself?
Very, very good. Good to see you too. And Pumi Mashiko, who's my co-host here and the return champion on the Burning Platform. Every week she adds her little bit of maybe there's some sarcasm, Pumi, especially when it comes to local political issues, but there's usually some real good insight that comes with it. So we're happy about that.
Never sarcasm, always genuine, just an inquiring mind.
And you're often shocked like our president is. Hey, everything shocks you. All right, we got lots to get into. So let's start with you, Brooks. I want to play you a clip in a minute of the Secretary of State or the Department of State and what they had to say about this Afghanistan situation. Joe Biden's come under some criticism in the last little while for the way that the withdrawal has happened. Before I play you anything, what are your outtakes on what is essentially a very messy, ugly, and not particularly satisfying situation? Certainly it's embarrassing for the United States. I think that's roundly the opinion of most people who saw what happened in Afghanistan, in Kabul airport, for example, those hideous images we've seen of people falling from planes, just desperately clinging to them, trying to get out of the country. We've seen the Taliban retaking pretty much the whole country as well. This is not a great withdrawal. Is this Biden's Saigon?
I've got 2 points to make for you, Gareth. First, there was no good choice for Joe Biden. No matter what he did, no matter what the government did, it would be a bad choice with a nasty outcome. And I think he felt that the sooner they made the choice, that they cut to the bone on this, the better off they were. Because, point two, because they could then concentrate on things that were actually more important. I mean, this has been a generation where the international attention of the U.S. has been sucked into alternatively Iraq or Afghanistan, neither of which were central to American security and international position. The fact that they got out, the fact that no Americans have been killed for a number of years, actually, in combat in Afghanistan, points to the fact that there were other things to do. There were other fish to fry, and they have been sadly neglected for the last number of years. This gives a chance to sort of start again. And the other point, of course, is that this was not Joe Biden's war. This was Joe Biden's ending the war. You go back a year plus, and it was Donald Trump who negotiated with the Taliban for this withdrawal. And Joe Biden felt, as I understand it, obligated to carry out an agreement that the government had made, well or badly, but to get it done and get out of there and be finished with it. The fact that there is on the airport tarmac thousands of Afghans desperately trying to clamber onto a C-17, even if they have to hold on parts of the wheel well, is terrifying. But you have a situation anywhere in the world where the collapse of a government happens and a new bunch of people come in who have a reputation for bloodthirstiness and vengeance, you're going to have that kind of thing happen. And it's terrible to watch and it's appalling to have to observe, but it's the way we are as people.
All right. It sounds kind of like, oh, well, too bad. I mean, that's kind of how it sounds. I know that that's not what you mean, but if you look at an administration that is so focused on optics, I mean, everything around the masking and coronavirus, everything around kind of Kamala Harris, the whole thing here, the optics of this are just terrible, and it's bad for Joe Biden. The fact that he only said something after a number of hours, if not a number of days of saying nothing. We've heard absolutely zero from the rest of the administration. And then this from the same people. Here's that clip. I just want you to comment on this, because it seems to me that they're living in a parallel universe, which doesn't have a whole lot of reality attached to it. You mentioned the Taliban being this group of bloodthirsty savages. It's the only way to put it. But look at how the State Department has reacted to this. And tell me if this guy is even connected to the same world that we live in.
The UN Security Council issued a joint press statement earlier today calling for a new government that is united, inclusive, and representative, including with the full and meaningful participation of women. The Council spoke with one voice to underscore that Afghanistan must abide by its international obligations, including to international humanitarian law, and ensure the safety and security of all Afghans and international citizens.
Are just quaking in their boots after that, because clearly the State Department believe that the UN are going to step in here, or that someone's going to step in and help. It sounds almost like this guy believes that talking about inclusivity and diversity and women's rights is going to make the Taliban sit up and take notice. That is probably one of the weakest things I've ever seen from the US. It's outrageous that guy gets on TV and says that on C-SPAN, thinking someone anywhere is going to listen to him. Crazy.
Well, Price's comments were almost an exact quote from the agreement that Donald Trump's administration signed with the Taliban. I mean, the phraseology was almost exact, even right down to the commas. I mean, it was what had been adopted from that negotiation in Doha a year ago.
Are we going to blame Donald Trump, he hasn't been president for a number of? Are we going to blame him? Like people are still blaming apartheid here in South Africa 25 years later. Are we going to blame him for this when he may have handled this very differently? Maybe he would have even handled it better. Who knows? But certainly to blame him, this is a Biden administration spokesperson. Surely they must take some responsibility here.
Well, they've obviously taken the responsibility to make the decision to move on. But you can't get away from, I mean, before we came on for your discussion, you had that lovely little moment where George W. Bush was sort of dancing in his seat.
Yes.
And, if you want to look for the original sin, you have to cast your mind back to George W. Bush. If when they first attacked the Al-Qaeda in the mountains in Afghanistan in 2001, if they had said, okay, the place is run by a bunch of despots, but we've done what we have to do and we've dealt with the people that caused enormous harm to our country, let's move on. Nobody would have said anything, because it was almost unanimous worldwide that was an appropriate act to carry out. What happened, and you have to figure out who to blame, what happened was that version of a commitment somehow metamorphized into something very different. Let's fix all of Afghanistan. Let's get rid of the other people. Let's preserve. Yeah, go ahead.
Brooks, that brings something that and it's again back in the news. The Congress representative Barbara Lee, right? So she's the only person back then that said, let's just think about this a second, how we go about this, how we, go in there and take out the emotion. So everybody at the time was very emotional. I mean, they were like, 2,000 odd Americans, 2,600 Americans had died in those attacks. had died, and they were emotional, rightly so. We spoke earlier in the show about how we saw George Bush coming out very strongly on Ground Zero, kind of saying the rest of the world is going to hear from us. So there was retribution. That's what they wanted, and here they are, trillions of dollars later, 20 years later, and the decision really to pull out is an economic decision now, because it's just no longer sustainable.
Brooks, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were only 3,500 odd troops up to a short while ago in Afghanistan. Now, then they've had to put more people in because of what's going on this week. So ironically, the withdrawal has ended up with an addition of troops to it. 3,500 troops is not a lot. I think that the US has probably more people stationed in Germany at this point than they did in Afghanistan in the last little bit.
By an order of magnitude more.
Right.
Look,
so it couldn't have even cost that much to have kept them there, or to at least have phased it out a little more gracefully. This does look bad for Biden, is my point. It really doesn't help him.
No, there's no question in my mind, as you're pointing to, there's no question in my mind that the manner of the withdrawal was handled badly. They did not, after all, even discuss this with the sitting government of Afghanistan, as febrile and feckless as it might have been. They didn't even have a conversation with them about this. But the writing was on the wall for sure. I mean, at the peak of the commitment in Afghanistan, there were 117,000 troops. That obviously was never going to be sustainable. Down to a couple of thousand who were not in combat roles, but who were the backbone for what passed for the Afghan army and air force. Suddenly you take that away and there is nobody to maintain the air command and control system. There's nobody to provide the communications backbone. There's nobody to provide the management of intelligence data and so forth. And it would have been inevitable in some way, shape, or form that the Afghan government would have begun to disintegrate slowly or faster, but not over a weekend.
I'm interested to know what you believe the impact, the psychological impact then of the manner of withdrawal on A, the Taliban, but B, on the rest of the world, just seeing America scrambling in this manner to leave. And now they're putting troops back in, and they've got the Turks coming in with them. It's the shambles that it is. I'm interested to know what you think that psychological impact on the optics of what America World Police is.
Well, if you go back to the media conference the Taliban had the day they arrived in Kabul, or actually the afternoon, if you saw it, they were using sort of your standard place for doing this. They even had the little bottles of artisanal water on their desk. They look for all the world
and
like
sanitizer.
Who were veterans of international conferences. And I like to think of the way they were delivering themselves as the Taliban version 2.0. Instead of that bunch of people who were lopping off hands and making women stay inside their houses, they were trying to give the image of an organization that now understood the world was a different place. And in some ways it is. When they first came into power.
A very different place.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
because Ivo seems to have a huge disagreement on this front. So Ivo, let me bring you in. You've been sitting there listening. What do you have to say about all of this?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I think that's naive to think that the Taliban is somehow reformed and is somehow, No,
I didn't say they were. I just said that they're making the illusion. They're making the demonstration that that's who they are.
Yes, well, I'm sure they're trying to make that demonstration while the US still has a few guns on the ground. But, I mean, Ayan Hirsi Ali, I was reading something she wrote yesterday, and she said that the US was happy to fly the rainbow flag over Kabul last month in an act of meaningless virtue signaling. And now it's just gone and thrown Afghanistan's gay population to the Taliban wolves. And it's the same for Afghanistan's women. It's the same for all of the people that worked with the US government and the US military in Afghanistan. There was no arrangement to get them out and get them visas and get them to safety before the US pulled out. I mean, this is an absolute tragedy. China has already told Taiwan to take note that this is how the US operates. It abandons its allies. You know, so it's the whole affair has severely damaged the standing of the West. And
they did this
with
with
the times of Israel.
You know?
The Times of Israel is also reporting that what you're seeing with the Taliban's march is shows the growing kind of like minimalization of American influence, and then running out of Afghanistan in that manner actually shows that they have significantly been reduced in the eyes of not just the militants, but also what they are willing to do to support their allies.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's a tragedy for the world. I think it's not just America's own standing. I think it's the standing of liberal democracies in the West in general. You know, and you know, it brings you to a broader issue really, and that is there a way for modern liberal democracies to win a war? When last have modern liberal democracies actually won a war? It's a significant war. You know, it goes back to Vietnam.
Not Vietnam, not Korea.
Not Korea. Iraq is not really won. Libya, they just went in and bombed the crap out of Gaddafi and then left the place to civil war. You know, so there's
I don't think you've ever been to Korea, then, have you?
I haven't been to Korea. No. Look, South Korea was back in the 50s. You know, South Korea is a good example. South Korea is a good example of a country that was supported and that continues to be supported, and it continues to host a very significant American presence.
Go back to what I said right at the beginning, which is that the best case that can be made for this withdrawal is that it finally frees the country from having to be focused almost obsessively on either northern Iraq or Afghanistan. There are too many other things that are more important. Of course, the Chinese would tell Taiwan that, see, pay attention now, this is a lesson for you. And of course, the Times of Israel would say that kind of thing. But this gives an opportunity. It's not a guarantee, but it's an opportunity for the U.S. to spend a rather larger amount of its energies and time focusing on really important issues like it's dealing with China, it's dealing with the resurgent and difficult Russia, its relationship with Western Europe, and its internal rebuilding, rather than spending all of its energy and all of its time focused on a place in Central Asia where there was, up until 2001, no discernible American interest.
What about the financial implication? I mean,
before we move on from that, Pumi, I just want to say something about Afghanistan itself. I mean, the way that the Afghan military entirely abandoned their posts, the way that the government fled, with the flames on their backs, the way everybody the way these people capitulated, and all the people that we saw at the airport were grown men of fighting age who had no interest in defending their own country. It's almost like the people of Afghanistan, and we know how tribal and how undemocratic that part of the world is. But my God, there's just, the women and children were abandoned. Old men were left to look after the villages. These guys who had been supposedly entrusted with keeping the place going after 20 years of training and all the equipment that a man could wish for, they've just abandoned their posts. This is the greatest show of a lack of courage from the Afghan people. Let's just leave America out of this for a second, that you could possibly imagine. A dereliction of duty at the highest level. I can't imagine living in a place where the men won't even come to the defense of their own women. And forget that America, just for a moment, that they pulled out. There is no way that a country could survive if this is how their men behave.
I agree.
You sound exactly like my wife. And she said the same thing the other day.
Your wife must be...
It was appalling to see. It was appalling to see Ashraf Ghani, the president, flying off with suitcases of money. I mean, he left money on the tarmac. That's like.
But that's one of the problems that That's one of the problems that they created there. Instead of building a nation, the US is going to spend 20 years creating a corrupt and lazy bureaucratic class. They were far less motivated to take bullets for the country than they were to score dollar-denominated contracts.
But hold on, I want to go back to something Brooks said earlier, which I think is absolutely true. It rings in my ears that if they had decided that this was a counter-terror operation and they went in, bombed the living hell out of the Al-Qaeda as they were then and the Taliban who were harboring them, and said, we're not here to do nation building. We're not here to do humanitarian work. We're not the world police. We're here to get some retribution for what happened on 9/11. Everybody would have been perfectly happy with this. How did it get confused? How did it get to a point where suddenly it was all about aid or about military contracts or about trying to entrench democracy or any of this nonsense, which is not the US's responsibility? That's where Biden made a very good point in his speech the other day.
I'm not sure that everybody would have been happy with that. If you look at Hillary Clinton in Libya, right, who went in hard and fast, took out Gaddafi, and achieved the short-term objectives, because that's one of the alternatives. One of the two alternatives I think the US has is go in hard and fast, send in special forces, send in mercenary specialists,
drones,
crush your drones, crush your objective, and claim victory, boom, and then leave, But then what happens is you leave a power vacuum. So you end up with a country that is either vulnerable to civil war, or a country that, all the bad guys just recover and take over, or the place would have been ripe for picking for a foreign invader.
I hate to say the obvious, but that's where we are now anyway, despite these intervening 20 years, right?
True. So
the moot point.
So the alternative
but there is no
to occupy Afghanistan not just for 20 years, but for 80 years. Do what they did in South Korea. Right? Give a younger generation, which has only just got to know freedom and opportunity, give them a chance to grow up into the leadership of their country. Right? Wait until they're 50 and 60 and lead the country.
But America can't afford to do that anymore. America cannot afford to do that anymore. Brooks, I'm looking at the American deficit, just the deficit, the trillions of dollars in debt that the American government is in. You were talking earlier about taking time and money and resource, worrying about other things instead of this war in Afghanistan. Is the economy one of those things that they should be worrying about?
Well, of course. The economy in the short term is bouncing back pretty well from the COVID shutdowns.
That'll happen if you put $6 trillion back into it of artificial printed money. Sure.
Well, that's. The point of that kind of policy is to supercharge purchasing power to give people resources. But unemployment is now down to about 5.5% too. Which, if this country could achieve, just imagine what it would look like.
Amazing.
It would be a very different kind of place. The money that has been passed by Congress, or will shortly be passed by Congress, will be close to revolutionary in terms of its share of money going into infrastructure building or rebuilding. The only other real equivalent is the early 1930s in the recovery from the Great Depression. But I want to go back to Ivor's point as well, which is they should have simply stayed there forever and ever. Ivor, that's very nice. That's really akin to you saying to somebody else, why don't you go fight my battle somewhere else with somebody else, and I'll sit there and I'll applaud. And that really isn't fair. That isn't appropriate. And let's look at Afghanistan in an historical context. Its nickname, if you look it up, Afghanistan, Graveyard of Empires. Alexander the Great tried this. The
British Empire
sent an army of 15,000 men to
the Russians
Kabul
tried.
In 1842. How many people came back from Kabul when the British tried this? One person made it back. It's really quite an extraordinary tale. The Russians sent 115,000 soldiers to Afghanistan. They had 10% of that amount were casualties. It's an extraordinary thing. And by the time they left, the Soviet Union was about ready to collapse. And this, these are cautionary tales that you have to. This is truth on the ground rather than armchair speculation. The examples are too many to simply say, no problem, we should have stuck it out forever. Yeah. Afghanistan
is America's withdrawal the end of the American empire?
I think that's a little
different kind of question.
The situation with the Soviets in Afghanistan was very different from the situation of the Americans in Afghanistan. The Soviets were fighting the Americans by proxy. The Americans went in there and gave the Mujahideen a whole lot of support, a whole lot of weapons that they didn't have. If the Americans hadn't got involved in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion, the Soviets probably would have crushed Afghanistan and taken it over, and it would have become a Soviet republic. So I'm not sure that comparison really holds up. It's skewed to say, graveyard of empires, but I'm not sure that those comparisons are all that instructive.
But that's what the Afghanis.
It takes a long time, but I want to get back to a point made earlier that this would have just been an expense for the Americans and a perpetual expense. Can you say the same thing for Europe? America spent a whole lot of money in Europe rebuilding Europe and turning Europe into a liberal, peaceful democracy. America spent a whole lot of time and effort occupying Japan and turning Japan into a modern, peaceful, liberal democracy. They spent how long have they been in Korea now? I mean, this goes back to the 50s, so we're talking about 70 odd years. This is how long it takes to build a nation. It took Western countries centuries to crawl out of the Dark Ages. So what are the chances that any violently repressive theocracy can be turned into a liberal democracy in just 20 years with limited casualties? I don't think it can. But has it been a net cost to America to support Japan, to support Europe, to support South Korea? No, I don't think so. I think the whole world has become richer by doing that.
I'm going to give Brooks a moment to respond, and then Pumi's got a question, but I do want us to move on to some other things. Brooks, go ahead. Okay. You want to respond to Ivo?
Sure. I just wanted to point out that in Europe after World War II, the original understanding was that the Europeans themselves would have to make substantial contributions both in money and human resources. In Japan, the same thing happened. In South Korea, the same thing happened. In each of these examples, it was the commitment of the individual nations concerned that made the difference. The Marshall Plan was not simply a wheelbarrow worth of cash from the United States and saying, here, take it, it's yours. It was an investment. And some of it was even on commercial terms. In Japan, this most significant contribution was the demand for supplies and support during the Korean War at the beginning. Afterwards, the Japanese recovered their own skills and became the economic powerhouse that they are. The Afghan government never demonstrated that kind of effort or commitment. And
neither did the Afghan people. I mean, the Afghan people didn't either, and that was, I think, a point we saw come to a really ugly head this week. Pums, do you want to throw in one last thing here, and then I do want us to look at South Africa for a little bit.
I'm interested in this idea of the death of empires, because I'm looking at where America is today, and it's kind of diminishing influence is the first thing, but also they debt financed this thing for the past 20 years. At the end of 2020, they were $2 trillion is what they had debt financed this thing at. Just the interest on that alone in the next 6 years is going to be 6.5 trillion. Right? And there's a study, a PwC study that's projecting to 2050 that the American economy is going to be lower than that of China. And they can't fight wars, they pull out, is what we're seeing. Is this America's influence in the world declining? And is Afghanistan that last bastion where they had to hold?
Two quick points, because I know Gareth wants to move to some other interesting topics. The percentage of the economy versus the percentage of debt is actually lower than it was. We're talking in percentage terms, not absolute numbers. It's lower than it was a generation ago. The interest rate is probably at its, for the last 60, 70 years, it's at the lowest point. It's almost free money to borrow, and you'd be foolish, in fact, to tax higher to raise the money to do certain things than it is to borrow at the ridiculous level of interest that's being charged now. But to your larger question, it is almost certainly inevitable that China will have a larger gross domestic product than the United States by the end of this decade. But they are, after all, 4 times larger in population terms, and they have been growing at 7-8% a year because they have also been financing this through debt and through effectively the printing of their own currency. So the Chinese have their own debt crisis to cope with, as well as the one thing most people tend to forget, they have a population crisis. For 2 generations, they had a one-child policy. They are going to have a huge overhang of older people to care for and a much smaller base of working age people to carry that for the next 10, 15 years.
So from geopolitics and from Afghanistan, who knew we'd be talking about that 20 years later? But here we are now with South Africa, and lots to talk about here. So our South African government has come up with this brilliant idea, and I'm sure you saw the story on Fin24 yesterday. Our government has this brilliant plan, talk about paying things, Pumi, that we should pay an additional 12% of our earnings into a state-managed fund, because, of course, you know, these guys they manage money so well. They gazetted a green paper on comprehensive social security and retirement reform, as if we have the luxury of that in this country. We don't even have enough employed people at the moment to be a sustainable tax base. But they reckon we should initially be obliged to contribute up to 12% of our earnings and up to a certain ceiling, which is currently proposed as being something around 276,000 Rand a year. This means that if you earn more than that, you'll pay a maximum of 12%, how nice of them, to the fund. And the first 10% of this contribution will go to the mandatory fund rather than a private sector retirement fund. The next 2% will go towards unemployment insurance. So just off the top of your head, Ivo, how do you feel about this? Another 12% of your money going to government? It's obviously a great investment. You must be chomping at the bit.
Yeah. I have it lying in my bottom drawer. It's not doing anything. So, you know, I'm glad that the government is proposing to take my money and to do something productive with it. You know, it's I'm really looking forward. I'm really looking forward to all the great services and stuff I can get from the government for what really is a very, very small amount of money. No, you know, it's ridiculous. The whole thinking behind this is wrong, and it's they're thinking about it the wrong way around. They want to be a modern welfare state. But the thing is, all of the successful welfare states in the developed world, they didn't start out as these social democracies, right? They started out making their money, getting rich on the back of free markets and free trade and industrious people. Holland was owned the seas in the 17th century. Britain, the same sort of thing. They became rich on trade. Only once they became rich could they afford to implement substantial social safety nets, and start offering things like free healthcare and government pensions and unemployment insurance and so on. And even then, those welfare measures came at a significant cost.
Even at a base level, Ivo, your economy needs to be growing in order for you to be able to sustain programs like this. And ours is shrinking. We have major problems going on in our economy. To have lofty ideals like this isn't about visionary leadership. It's about a detachment from reality.
No, I mean, that's one of, I wrote a column about the basic income grant or universal basic income recently, and that this is part of what they just proposed in this green paper. And one of the big objections comes from Frans Cronje, from the IRR CEO. And he says, look, this would allow the ANC government to congratulate itself on a job well done. We're looking after the poor and all of that, without the pressure of having to enact any of the underlying economic reforms that we so urgently need to reestablish a thriving, growing economy. So, it'll buy them votes in the next election, perhaps. But that's all it is. It's a voter bribe. It puts a plaster on the symptoms, but it doesn't address any of the underlying problems that cause the country's high unemployment and poverty levels. We need to start thinking the other way around. You can't start spending money that you don't have before you have it. We need to start growing the economy first. And then we can start thinking of, okay, now that we've got growth going, now that we can actually have people that we can afford to tax, or that can afford to be taxed. Now let's see what we can do in terms of social services.
I mean, Pumi, when I read the headline out to you earlier on the show this morning, you just kind of rolled your eyes because you're a small business owner, you're a mom, you've also been through lockdown. This is not a unique story in South Africa. There are so many people who are close to the breadline or who are trying to keep themselves and their families above that as far as possible. No one can afford an extra 12%.
We've got 30 million South Africans living on less than 20 Rand a day.
And about
that's what our reality looks like. 30 million South Africans living on less than 20 Rand a day.
The scariest part of that is that 30 million people, they don't have a job. So that 20, 30 Rand a day that they need isn't coming from a place where the economy is generating it and manufacturing it. That's government money, and it's going to run out.
And as South Africans, what we need to actually start thinking about is we need to start thinking differently about who our government is and what economic policies the next government is going to put in place. It's not going to come from the ANC government. They don't have the ideas. They have no new ideas. And they've shown us in the past 20 odd years that they are unable to, even the little that they have been entrusted with, look after it and grow it. So that's just for me, that's where we are. As South Africans, that's where we are. We have to think about the next government and what the next government can do for South Africans, for our economy, for the people, before we start thinking about basic income grants and additional taxation and.
So it seems to me you and Ivo are mostly in agreement about this thing. Brooks, having the objective point of view of someone who really has looked at many of these things from the US, certainly when you were a diplomat, from the US point of view, what do you make of policies like this in an environment like ours in South Africa?
A couple of things. I've been listening to the interplay between the other two people with interest. The reason why retirement is more or less universally set at the age of 65 owes itself to a very interesting little historical quirk. In Germany, in the 1880s, when they first instituted old age pensions, they calculated that the average worker would die somewhere between the age of 67 and 68. Therefore, if they contributed to money going to pensions while they were working, the government would always be able to pay for old age pensions because the average worker would only get 2.5 years worth of that payment before they passed away. And as a result, every country in the world essentially has accepted the 65 benchmark as the point at which the money goes the other direction, even though the average person in most countries now lives 10, 15 years longer than that. And that produces a difficult problem, even if you run your system well. My second point would be, if that 12% were invested in the way which everybody agreed was maximally effective and efficient and produced returns on investment and created jobs and built buildings and fixed everything, most people wouldn't have much of a disagreement with that because they would be able to look around and see the benefit. On the other hand, I used to take the train from Johannesburg to Cape Town because I'm a train nut and I enjoyed the ride. Mm-hmm. And now I can't do that because the tracks are gone in places sufficient that they can't make a continuous trip anymore. Where one of my wife's sisters lives, it's very close to the main line, and you look out there, the rails are gone, and the overhead cabling is gone. The fence around the rails that used to be there, that's gone too. So that kind of productive investment has been going the other direction. But none of the maximal projections of doing it right are likely to happen. My own view is that a basic income grant is wrong-headed in the following way. The problem is not that people don't have money. It's quite clear they don't have money. If the average person lives on that very small amount of money that they get now, the amount of money which most people, if they were to think about it, could not figure out how to survive on that money. What people need is a way of learning and being employed. And the government's responsibility at this point has got to be one of putting young men to work, putting young men to positions, especially men, positions where they will have the skills to do that work and to do things that will contribute to the nation's infrastructure rather than detract from it. I mean, the studies that we've all seen say that if you have not had a job or an basic income effort by the time you are 35, you will never have one. Mm-hmm. And that dooms a population to never earning a living. If it were me and I were king and I were in charge, I would set up something like the Depression-era Civilian Conservation Corps in the US, which took 3 million young people and put them to work building trails and parks and roads and shelter, of it all, the whole range of things. 3 million people in the US was a considerable number of young men put to work in the middle of that period. And many of those people went on to have successful business, government, private industry careers. And they write about their experience because it changed the way they thought about their relationship to life, country, to family. But I'm not in charge.
No, but I love that. And it does teach people skills, which is something that's sorely lacking in our education system. We seem to be churning out lots and lots of people who have some grasp of some very basic ideas, but not necessarily skills. And that is precisely the part of our economy which is a hole at the moment. We need people who can weld and solder and build and fix and repair and put in pipes and, as you say, build trails and chop wood and things that are very basic. And none of those are things that young people are learning these days. They look down upon those things. They consider them to be beneath them, even if they're unemployed.
I mean, I have some issues with that proposal. I mean, I agree with the broad sentiment. That one of the big problems is that we have this young core of people who are basically undereducated and have really no employable skills, which is one of the reasons we have the structural unemployment problem. It's not that companies don't need workers; they can't find workers that can actually do the job. Now, the government already has this extended public works program, which is supposed to sort of do that sort of thing. I don't think it does it very well because it basically pays people to dig holes and fill them up again, which doesn't really contribute or contribute at all to skills building. But there's a bigger thing. The jobs need to be created by the private sector ultimately. And, the government needs to make that possible. And at the moment, the government isn't making that possible. It is bleeding capital out of the economy. Another 12%, that is capital, right? That is what people would otherwise invest in small businesses, in bigger businesses, in growing the economy, in creating new jobs. That just won't happen now. So, if the government could turn around and say, look, we are going to focus more on education, we're going to focus more on vocational training, and actually get people to, by the time they hit 18 or 20, that they're actually employable. I could support that idea, but ultimately the impetus must come from the private sector, and the government needs to reduce the burden on the private sector, make it easier for the private sector to grow, to start new businesses, to grow them, to grow employment. Because otherwise we're all going to end up working for the government. And frankly, that is not what I've considered to be job creation or productive work for that matter. You know, you see all these people waving flags at the side of the road. They do nothing for this country. Right? They're a dead weight cost.
I don't think the question is if the government would reprioritize. I think the question is, can our government do that? Does it have the ability?
I don't think they can. You know, they're mired in this sort of socialist ideology that they are responsible for creating jobs. They are responsible for growing the economy. They're not. They're not. They are responsible for getting the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
You know, no enterprise has ever been furthered by, what was that old quote? You know, no enterprise has ever been furthered more by the alacrity with which government has got out of the way.
Ivor, two things that you may not be attuned to with the example I quoted, the Civilian Conservation Corps and those 3 million. Those were not permanent jobs, first of all. Those were meant to be stopgap measures until such time as the private sector could begin to pick up these people and pick them up because they were more skilled than when they went into the process. Second thing is they had to save a portion of that money that they did earn and send it to their families as a support to the people who were not working. But third, they had to be involved in educational training as part of their effort, the enlistment of a year or whatever it might have been. The idea was very clearly to produce a core of young men who were better able to join the ranks of the employed at the end of the time, once there was a possibility of employment, than before they went into it. The problem with the extended government employment project, I can't remember the precise name of it now, is there's no endpoint to it, and there's no particular training to it. And digging holes and filling them up or picking up trash isn't job training. It may make things look a little better than they did before, but it doesn't improve the skills or the capabilities of the people digging or filling the holes.
So Brooks,
this is always one of the problems that our government has had. Sorry, Gareth. Brooks, this is always one of the problems that our government has had. They have no exit strategies, you know, so great idea to have some kind of, what are you laughing at, Gareth?
I'm laughing.
You know, they have...
We started this whole conversation about Joe Biden's exit strategy in Afghanistan. Now we're talking about how our government have no exit strategies.
They don't. You know, they started out with a great idea that says, how are we going to lift millions of South Africans out of poverty? Let's have some kind of stipend. Let's start there. But they had no idea how those people who get that stipend, whether it's a child grant, whether it's an unemployment grant, whether it's a disability grant, how are we going to get these people off that grant system? They had no idea of what the exit strategy was going to be. Similarly with public works, this extended public works program has no exit strategy. So they bring you into the program, and then what? Then you're here permanently. That's the problem.
Well, it assumes permanent failure as well, which is so cynical. And I like Ivo's comment earlier about how really this is mostly a vote-buying exercise to our government. It's not really an attempt to change or assuage the difficulties of people who have no jobs. But, you know, Brooks, just listening to you talking about these programs that were initiated back in the days where America was a bold country. I mean, you mentioned the resurgent economy post-COVID, but in reality, I think there's something like 10 million jobs available in America at the moment, and no one's taking them. And a lot of that is because there's been so much free government money plugged into the system. You know, some people are earning more just sitting at home than getting a job. You've got employers who are willing to give huge starting bonuses, and they're still not getting enough staff. And I wonder if the very lessons that America did teach the world, or that we should have learned from America in the early part of the last century, are precisely the lessons they themselves have not learned, if you look at the way that the US economy is behaving at the moment. And all of this free government money that we talk about in South Africa, which isn't for free, is similarly not free in America. And it seems like governments everywhere are also just trying to spend their way out of a pandemic and trying to spend their way out of a hole without any exit strategy there either. What are your comments on that?
I mean, part of the problem with this, with the mismatch between jobs available and people looking for work. One of them is the skills mismatch. There are a lot of people who have skill set A, but the employers want people with skill set B, C, or D. And until people in the first category can take that set of, can bring those sets of skills or gain them somewhere and put them to work, there's going to remain that core. The second part of it is it requires, in many cases, for people to up stakes and move somewhere else. One of the fastest growing parts of the economy for a number of years was South Dakota. And there aren't a lot of people in New York City desperate to move to South Dakota.
Right.
For a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is that it's almost like a foreign country. And I mean, you know, if you've been to New York, and I don't know if you've been to South Dakota, but you know what I mean.
And South Dakota, by the way, South Dakota is not even the best Dakota.
Well, yeah, there's that problem too. There is a housing shortage in South Dakota. There is a employee shortage in South Dakota, and there are jobs available, but you have to get there, you have to move there, you have to find a place to stay, and so forth. Just on a very personal note, my older daughter lives in the United States, and she has, since COVID started the lockdowns and the shutdowns, she has largely been out of work. Now she's begun to create her own employment prospects. She teaches via Zoom and other social media kinds of things. But she gets unemployment compensation, but she has to file every week that she has had at least 3 efforts to get a job, whether it was an interview or an application or an inquiry. And as long as she does that, she will get the unemployment, but she has to show that she's actively part of the looking for work workforce. Eventually, it will run out and she'll be really stuck. But right now, at least, there was that cushion. But unemployment compensation isn't a government gift. It's money that you paid in large part while you were working. So this is your
like our
payback.
UIF.
Yes, indeed. And as a result, it's the cushion that keeps you from starving while you're looking for work, rather than simply the permanent solution to poverty because we give you more money.
So you answered a question just now by saying if you were king, this is the kind of program you'd implement. I'm going to wrap up this conversation. We're almost at 8 o'clock. And let Ivo and Pumi tell us, if they were king and queen, what they would do to solve some of these questions around universal basic income, around welfare, around retirement, basic economic questions that any government should be asking itself. I doubt very much, and I'm sure Pumi and Ivo will agree with me before I even have to ask them, that our government's ever thought of these things in terms of anything but theory and ideology. But what would you do if you were king, Ivo?
Well, you know, enacting a basic income grant is a great way to make sure that we'll never actually be able to afford one. So, you know, I would take to heart what I just quoted earlier from Frans Cronje, that you really need to look at the underlying economic reforms. We need radical economic transformation, to quote, to appropriate a term.
Oh, really? You Carl Niehaus, Jacob Zuma.
Yes, but that means freeing the economy. You know, we need economic freedom. There's all the evidence in the world points to
Julius Malema's songbook, Economic
yes,
Freedom.
Exactly. I'm an economic freedom fighter. I actually wrote a column years ago about how upset I was that Julius Malema called his lot of socialists the EFF because he appropriated a term that he really doesn't deserve. But we need to look at freeing the economy to let businesses actually grow and create the jobs that we need. Have government focus on education, and specifically primary and secondary education, which is really poor in this country. You know, the fact that only what is it, about 4% of people who go into kids who go into grade 1 come out with a pass in mathematics at the end of matric. You know, that is a core problem. Right. So focus on sort of preparing people for a workforce. and then leave business free to grow and to create the jobs that the country needs.
But I can hear loads of millennials and Gen Z people saying, "Oh, hang on, Ivo, can't I just become a YouTube star or an Instagram influencer, and then I don't have to worry about any of this stuff?" Pumi, what do you think? If you were queen, what would you enact? Well, you're on mute, Pums.
One, I would lower taxes.
Yes.
I think 2, less barriers to entry for business, right? So less paperwork, less kind of cumbersome things that you have to jump over before you can start a business, before you can run a business successfully. I would remove as many barriers to starting and running businesses as I could. And I love the concept of some kind of civilian service for young people, because it would give you an opportunity to reskill those people. It also give you an opportunity. I think you were talking about millennials and Gen Z earlier, right? It also gives an opportunity to rewire their thinking about each other and about their country and the service that they give to their country. And that will have an added benefit of maybe creating a little bit of social cohesion. You know, if you got to spend time with each other, you can get to know each other a little bit better, and then you'd hate each other less.
And that would be very, very welcome. So, Brooks, thank you very much. I'm sorry that you had to become a spokesperson for the United States government. That wasn't our intention this morning, but you've also given us some tremendous insight into some of the history. I mean, I was fascinated about that thing about employment age that you brought up. I think that's really useful information.
I know.
It's always good. It's always good to check in with you, and I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Brooks Spector. Ivo, always good to see you too, and thank you again for a drop or two of cynicism mixed in with some good research and some paying attention to all the fundamentals that some of us just don't have the inclination to do on a daily basis. Thank God there are actual journalists doing this. And Pumi Mashigo, your value is just inestimable, especially when we would make you queen if those proposals. I don't know how popular you'd be with everybody, but you would with me. Yeah. Thank you all very, very much. The Burning Platform is brought to you by Nando's. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Burning Platform brought to you by Nando's every Thursday here on cliffcentral.com. And if you want more of this, you can listen to any of the previous episodes. They stand up even now. Most of the conversations we've had about all of these things, including Afghanistan over the years, I think you'd find that there's some consistency going on here, which is a rare thing in the media. So thanks for joining us. We will